Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel today. Thank you for the panelists to be here. Thank you for the audience for joining us this afternoon. Today's panel is on an overview of different strategic approaches in the degrowth movement. And my name is Nathan Barlow. I'm one of the coordinators of the conference and a PhD candidate at the VU. I am also a climate justice activist and on the editorial team of degrowth.info. And my IT helper helping me today is Suni, and she's also a co-organizer of the panel, and you might have heard her last night playing the harp. I want to first tell you a bit about how we're going to use the tools today so that it's comfortable to navigate between this webinar jam channel we're on here and the Discord app in parallel. So here on the webinar jam channel, we invite you to use the chat to share any questions you have directly with the panelists or for the panelists. And if you have any comments that you want to share with the audience to communicate amongst yourselves, there's a dedicated Discord channel that will be put in the chat, and that you can use for talking to each other throughout the panel. And in addition, we'll have translation for this panel, and that'll be simultaneous in German. And there's also a link to the dedicated Discord channel for live simultaneous translation, and that will also be in the chat for you to access. And just be sure to keep an eye, even when you're in the Discord channel, also here on the Webinar Jam live streaming of the panel, so that you can follow the polls that we'll post to the audience and ask for your feedback on. And also, of course, so you can see the panelists in human form. So I'll give a quick overview of the structure and aims of the panel, and then I'll hand it over to the panelists. So each panelist will first give a 5 to 10 minute input, and followed by a chance for the other panelists to comment and reply to their inputs. And then we'll transition to a Q&A by the audience and a discussion on some of the pertinent questions of this panel. Some of the aims of the panel, the three main aims of this panel will be to discuss frameworks for better understanding different strategic approaches in degrowth, consider strengths and weaknesses, as well as tensions and synergies of different strategies, and finally, to propose ways for the degrowth movement to engage with the important consideration of strategy. So that's the long intro, and thank you all again for being here. And I would first ask Katya to begin to introduce herself and tell us why the topic of strategy is something that she's interested in and passionate about.
Hello, everyone. My pleasure to be on this panel and to be part of this great conference. So well done, the organizers, for putting together such an event. My name is Chertkovskaya. I'm also known as Katya. I live in Malmö, Sweden, and I'm based at Lund University at the Technology and Society Department. And my research is on degrowth and critical organization studies, and I have been part of the degrowth discussion since 2014, I would say, since the Leipzig conference, which was a pivotal moment for me personally. And since then, I have also co-organized the Malmö conference and have engaged in degrowth in various ways. So I think it's important to address strategy. So now that degrowth has been around for some time as an academic discussion and as a movement also, and the question of how to actually make transformation happen with all the great ideas that are floating around and with all the alternatives that are in place, and how to address the very powerful pro-growth and problematic structures that we have. It's crucial, and also the current wave of the crisis that COVID-19 brings also makes, creates a momentum to further address this issue. So I'm very keen on addressing the strategic approaches and the kind of nuances and how we can address them within the degrowth movement.
Great, thanks a lot, Katya. Panos, I would ask you to go next.
Okay, so welcome from my side as well. Panos Petridis from the Institute of Social-Ecology.
Panos, I think your microphone is muted because we cannot yet hear you.
Can you hear me now? It's on. Yeah? Okay. I think it takes a few seconds, so I will wait next time. So my name is Panos Petridis from the Institute of Social-Ecology at the University, Boku University. I would say here in Vienna, but here became quite relative these days.
I still do not hear Panos. Is it just on my side, or I believe...
Wait, I'll try on. Can you hear me now? Yes? Nathan? Or is it only Nathan? Should I go on? Yes? Is Nathan?
I think we're having some technical issues. We can hear you, Panos, and the participants can hear you as well, but Nathan cannot. So I would just ask.
Sorry, Panos. Yes, please continue. It's a problem on my side with the audio.
Okay, but I hope you solve it because it will. Can you hear me now? Anyway, I go on, and I hope Nathan you will catch up with this. So, yeah, just want to say that yeah, I'm involved in mainly more local participatory research on socio-ecological transitions and community development, as well as so-called island sustainability. Mainly, and I've been involved in the degrowth discourse since more than a decade now in multiple ways, but let's say academically more explicitly around the topic of strategies and transformation. So it is with great pleasure not only to be on this panel, but also to see a conference pretty much dedicated on the topic. I think this is very timely.
Okay, thank you very much, Panos. I will just jump in for Nathan as he has some technical issues. Nilda, please, would you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hey, I'm Nilda, and I'm announced in the program as a research associate at the University of Kassel in the Department of Development and Post-Colonial Studies. But regarding to the topic we will discuss today on this panel, I want to mention that I'm speaking today actually as a part of the ELA collective. Suni will put the link to our website in the chat so you can see more about our collective. And I'm mentioning that because the topic I will talk about later are mainly linked to the work I do in the ELA collective. And our common way of thinking and writing together is an important part of how we work on questions on transformation and the ways of solidarity modes of living. Now a few words about the ELA collective. We are a group of about 35 young researchers and activists from a variety of fields. And together we wrote 2 books. One is about the topic of the imperial mode of living. There we analyze the way of how the imperial mode of living prevents a good life for all and how it is mainly based on the expense of people and nature. And in the second book, we asked for alternatives to the imperial mode of living and raised questions on transformation societies in a solidarity way. In the ELA collective, we are part of a diverse set of emancipatory movements within the broader field of global justice. And in our work, we aim to make the concept of the imperial mode of living accessible to a wider public and contribute towards an ecologically sustainable and socially just mode of production and living. Apart from the books we wrote, we give seminars, workshops, and talks on the topics of our books. And yeah, as I already said in the chat, you can see the link to our homepage, and there you find the books free to download. And the first book exists already in English, but the second we still have to translate it just in German. Well, and for now, I'm happy to be here, a little nervous, because it's a little weird not to know who is listening, and a kind of weird to talk to my computer. But apart from that, I'm very happy and excited about the upcoming discussion.
Thanks, Nilda. Hopefully now my audio is working again and I'll be able to hear you guys. Thank you all for the introductions. And now I would pass it off to Panos, who is going to introduce us to some of the work of Eric Olin Wright and introduce the strategic logics that he's worked with. Please, Panos.
Okay, so assuming you can hear me all well this time, including you, Nathan, I hope. My short input now will be a bit more introductory in also kind of highlighting some of the terms regarding this different strategic logic of transformation that already we started listening on this conference. Degrowth has developed over the years into a more subversive slogan that has come to unite like different actives and critical scholars that are in search of transformation, of socio-ecological transformation. So I would say Degrowth's main contribution in the past years have been mainly, on the one hand, to offer a new narrative, to collectively envision an alternative form of social organization beyond the logic of economism, and on the other hand, as a political project, to trigger this process of transformation by giving meaning to local initiatives and trying to connect different policy proposals. So the concept of transformation has been central and explicit within the degrowth debate from the start. What was not perhaps so explicit is how this transformation to come about. And exactly because degrowth aspires to unite different local and sectoral struggles with social movements and policy proposals, there has been a tendency to embrace a strategic plurality, a fact that sometimes has led to dispersed or even conflicting efforts. So within the movement, so to say. So my main argument today will be that there is a need to retain a synthetic viewpoint and evaluate strategies based on their emancipatory potential. But before I reach there, I make a short introduction about those different strategic logics. So with the risk of oversimplifying a bit now, in the degrowth literature and degrowth debate, I think we can identify three main strategic logics, or let's say means of transformation. So they come around in different names, but I find very useful the classification of the sociologist Eric Olin Wright, who has been also mentioned in some of the previous panels, who distinguishes between three main logics. So the first one he calls ruptural transformations. So those ones that envision creating new institutions through a sharp break with existing ones. The second logic is the interstitial transformations that seek to build new forms of social empowerment in capitalist society's niches and margins. And the third logic is the symbiotic transformations that involve strategies through the state that help open up greater space and support those interstitial innovations. So I want to just take them one by one, giving also some examples. So the ruptural logic refers to more direct confrontations between opposing social forces. So this one I will not discuss a lot, but we can somehow relate this ruptural logic when we think about social movements to the more traditional activism and direct action by civil society. So I speak about demonstrations, boycotts, civil disobedience, for example. We have the anti-extractivist movements, the struggles against the privatization of common spaces or common resources. So those transformations, those instances do not bring transformational change by themselves, but they, on the one hand, slow down unsustainable paths, and of course, they raise awareness. So moving on to the second logic, the interstitial logic, this basically refers to the creation of new institutions outside of present ones. So this has also been described within degrowth as nautopias, which basically refer to the already happening solidarity economy alternatives, that they try to reinvent work and social relations, more general, against the logic of capital. So commonly cited examples here include the various co-housing projects, the producer-consumer cooperatives or permaculture initiatives, the various social education and healthcare centers, or open source technologies. So these examples are mainly praised because while on the one hand they provide for specific needs, like for food, for housing, etc., they also contain the seeds of an alternative model of social organization and low-scale economy in practice, based on solidarity and collaboration, and I would add experimentation as well. So the basic idea here is that participation in such initiatives helps deconstruct the dominant consumer/capitalist anthropological type of our societies and creates a new collective political project. Now, those examples have a great potential in changing values within communities, but they also risk becoming just exit strategies for just a few concerned citizens in the global north, let's say. So why this is why it is important, I think, to explicitly link them to the third logic of transformation, which is the symbiotic logic. So I move on to the third one now, this symbiotic transformations, that essentially refer to institutional changes that support and empower those initiatives. Now we all know, I think, how important, but at the same time, difficult it is to achieve institutional change and reform higher level institutions. This has been discussed also yesterday in a very interesting panel, an evening panel. This is why Erik Olin Wright, and much before him also the social philosopher André Gortz, have made this very important and relevant distinction regarding reforms, and they introduced this idea of so-called non-reformist reforms. So what is this about then? Again, to make a long story short, I would say that conventional reforms basically are reforms that legitimize existing power structures and political processes. So in effect, achieve little transformative change. As examples, we can have like humanitarian aid or green growth investments can be some of those examples. Now, in contrast, non-reformist reform that has also been described in the degrowth literature as counter institutions or real utopias are basically incompatible with the preservation of the current system and directly aim at empowering social movements and demands. So to use the words of Wright, they intend to simultaneously make life better within the existing economic system and expand the potential for future advances of democratic power. So some examples again here would be reduced working week in combination with the unconditional basic income. Another example would be worker-owned cooperatives or commons licenses, even social enterprises or ethical banks. So those examples aim at destabilizing hierarchical structures and open up spaces for new forms of more radical social organization to emerge. So just to conclude this, my first round, I would argue that a process of social transformation as envisioned by degrowth would, I think, by default include the synergy of between all those strategies. So a synthetic viewpoint can, on the one hand, empower individual struggles, but also help identify convergence points between political proposals. So, for example, the core of the radical degrowth institutions would essentially derive, I think, more from social movements and bottom-up initiatives. Yet still, in this current socio-political constellation that we live in, those would require the institutional arrangements that can safeguard them and support them, and that create the space and conditions for transformative policies to emerge. And this is also why I believe that such institutional changes should be also more explicitly part of social movement demands. I will leave it here for the moment and pass on to Katya.
Great, thanks, Panos. I would give a chance for any of the other panelists that want to respond or add on to what Panos has just given us as an input. Now's the window. Would anybody like to give a quick reply or clarification? Okay, then Katya, floor is yours.
Thank you. And my talk builds directly on what Panos has introduced. So I very much agree that it is a combination of strategic approaches that we need in degrowth. So, but we need to think of the priorities and tensions and possible cooptations that can come with this. So I will try to put across 4 points during this short time, based also on the work of Erik Olin Wright and also the book Towards the Political Economy of Degrowth that we co-edited with Stefania Barca and Alexander Paulson. So one point that I will make is that interstitial transformation is core to degrowth. The second point is that the symbiotic transformation is something we have to engage with, but this is where we should also be very careful about the possible cooptations. Then the third point is that we should really not shy away, I would say, from ruptural transformations, and there are ways to engage with those also. Finally, I will introduce the idea of nomadic utopianism as a particular kind of political subjectivity to move forward with this multiple strategic approaches while cherishing degrowth and its multiplicity. So now, one by one. So the first point is that, interstitial transformation is core to degrowth, and this is exactly the point that Andro Rilovic made yesterday at the at one of the panels. So this is very much speaks to the bottom-up direct democracy ideals that are core to degrowth, and Olin Wright further divides this one into two strategic logics of anti-capitalism: resisting and escaping. And this is exactly what degrowth does. So it is resisting growth and capitalism, but also it is, well, maybe I would not necessarily, well, escaping capitalism and building alternatives. So, and this is where the social movements that are close to degrowth, that many of us connect to, are located, such as climate and environmental justice movements. And this is also where alternative organizing practices such as cooperatives, such as commons, can be found. So this is this interstitial logic of transformation. But the problem is that so far they are there, and there are many examples, but they exist on the margins, and we simply have to engage in the symbiotic logic of transformation to make change happen. So something that also Panos has brought up already. And this is where Olin Wright talks about the logics of taming and dismantling capitalism as kind of strategic logics of anti-capitalism. And I would say that for a degrowth strategy, both are needed. So taming is about kind of regulating capitalist activity and neutralizing its harms, while dismantling is about transcending structures. So taming, an example would be, say, I don't know, stronger financial regulation is an example of taming. So, or when it comes to dismantling, an example would be putting forward policies that would actually support grassroots organizational practices, cooperatives. And in a way, we should be really careful about taming, but also without taming, maybe this dismantling-oriented practices can be a drop in the ocean. So say, if, I don't know, some investments are put into policies to support railway networks, but the aviation industry is not regulated heavily, then the transformation that we want to see will not necessarily come. So, but then, yesterday also Dennis Eversberg mentions that taming is something that we should be really careful about. So dismantling, I would say, is where we want the symbiotic transformation to go, and it should not end up with taming. So this is not, if our efforts lead to just taming, that will be cooptation. So then, thinking of the ruptures, this is something that Olin Wright mentioned, but doesn't really engage with so much, and he associates it with the strategic logic of smashing capitalism. And in Degrowth so far, also those who have engaged with Olin Wright's work have not really taken rupture on board. But I think that we should, and also this is something that Panos has brought up already, that, for example, acts of disobedience can be seen as ruptures. So if a coal power plant is blocked, it is a rupture in the capitalist system, even if a temporary one. So if ruptures are not understood as this kind of one-off transformation from capitalist to socialist or whatever society, like it happens with the Soviet Union, where I was born, and the kind of different issues and problems that that followed. So if we understand rupture in a more kind of in different temporal and spatial dimensions, I think it's a very important category for Degrowth to engage with. So acts of disobedience is one example, but also, say, worker occupations is another. So if, say, the people engaged in the Viome factory in Thessaloniki were waiting for kind of legislation and the reforms to come that would allow them to take over their factory as workers, they would probably, we would not have the example of Viome today. But as they did kind of create this rupture and overtook the factory when it went bankrupt and made it a democratically run, worker-run organization, then it gives, it kind of feeds into the other resistances out there and to the more interstitial transformations out there. And also it gives the kind of inspiration for the ideas around dismantling. So, for example, in policies, we can ask that during the times of crisis, if companies go bankrupt, they should have the chance to, the workers should have the chance to take them over. So I think, yeah, ruptures are important to engage with. So, and the fourth point that I would like to make is that, yes, we should engage with this different strategic approaches and be aware of the, well, cherish the multiplicity of Degrowth, but also be aware of the closures that come with it. So, hence, in the book Towards Economy of Political Economy, Towards the Political Economy of Degrowth, together with Stefania Barka and Alexander Paulson, we propose this idea of nomadic utopianism as a political subjectivity for degrowth action. So this means that we should act with courage, but we should also be very critical and self-reflective, being aware where closures can come in, and act with the idea that, yeah, there is this multiplicity of degrowth to be cherished. And acting this way and being aware and self-critical and politicizing our own actions, we can actually build ourselves as a movement, and we can also unite and build alliances with others. And then it is us collectively who should decide where the priorities are of us as the movement and where we should be kind of careful. And now there will be a chance to engage with a poll, which the idea of which is to see where the kind of priorities of those of us taking part in this panel at least are. So yes, I would like to leave it here.
Great, thanks, Katya. And if your eyes right now are on the Discord channel, shift your eyes over to the webinar jam so you can see the poll that Katya has put up for us and our IT helper has sent to you all for you to fill in. And I would hand it over now to Nilda, unless anybody wants to add anything on to Katya's points. Okay, then the floor is yours, Nilda.
Okay, thanks. Well, in my short input, I would like to add 3 different levels to the discussion on logics and strategies of transformation. Questions on transformations of societies are always linked to questions of hegemony. Questions on transformations questions on transformation of society are always linked to questions of hegemony. How and on which social level is hegemony safeguarded? And on which level do transformative logics and strategies have to operate to reach effects which not just stay on an individual level, but reach out to another logic of social organization and hence to another form of organizing societies? In the ILA collective, we work mainly with 3 levels on which hegemony is safeguarded, and therefore these 3 levels are relevant for questions of strategies on transformation. These 3 levels are everyday life, physical or material infrastructures, and institutions. The level of everyday life is important because it addresses the linkage between mental infrastructures, habits, desires, and knowledge, which is not just an individual point or choice, but linked to structures of society. The everyday life often appears as individual choice and is addressed in this way. For stabilizing and reproducing hegemony, everyday life is an important level. Concerning the question of transformation strategies, the everyday life is an important level to question the hegemonic way of living, organizing everyday life in alternative ways, and or experiencing and learning solidarity ways of living. This refers a lot to the points Panos and Katya already made. But just to make this level of intervening with strategies really pointing out it. Then the level of physical infrastructure. Physical or material infrastructures are linked to certain behavior. Certain ways of living and production favor and promote specific material infrastructures. Therefore, existing physical infrastructure enable certain ways of living and production and make others impossible. For example, the existing infrastructure for transport focused on individual transport rather than public transport. This way, material infrastructure stabilize and reproduce hegemonic ways of living and production and lead to them too. Thirdly, institutions. Institutions we understand in a broad sense. They set the framework for ways of living and production. We think of different kinds of institutions like parties, unions, churches, international organizations, educational institutions, as well as business, media, parliaments, courts of law, or government agencies. They stabilize and reproduce hegemonic ways of living and production too. That's why they are relevant for questions on strategies for transformation. This 3 levels need to be addressed when you talk and practice strategies for transformation. And now I would like to Suni to put on the matrix, so to visualize a little bit more what I just talked about and to link it to the part what Katya and Panos already said. Well, now you hopefully see the matrix, and in this matrix, we combine the 3 levels I just mentioned with the different strategies of transformation. Because of time, I just don't want to explain the 3 strategies you can see there: resist, push back the imperial mode of living. These are strategies we mainly focus on in the ILA collective, but I wonder if we could replace the upper line of strategies by the ones Katya was just referring to, and that would be maybe also a question we can discuss later on. So there you can, on the matrix, you can see more like a combination of levels. We have to we can intervene with strategies, and separate or different forms of strategies. Now, I will show you another slide. And on this matrix, you see examples for initiatives we try to put in this matrix. And there you can get an idea how to use the matrix as a tool to analyze existing strategies of the degrowth movement. And also get an overview on existing strategies and blanks regarding strategies of the degrowth movement. I just give you a short moment to just get an impression of this slide. And also regarding the time, it's more like an impulse to discuss later on deeper, but before we start the discussion and come back to questions and linkages between the things we just talked about, I would also like to make a poll with you on the following question. And you probably can see it now on the chat. And you can see the question: on which level do you perceive the degrowth movement as very active with visible range? And I would like to answer the question. And I give you a little moment more to answer. Well, and as you all can see the results, right? As you can see, the results of the poll, the main actions of the degrowth movement at the moment are on the everyday level. And that's what also Panos and Katya were referring to. We also in the ILA collectives would say that the degrowth movement at the moment focus mainly on the level of the everyday life, on niches and stabilizing alternative practices, but strategies with a focus on institutional transformation at the moment underrepresented. And that's maybe a way or question we should discuss and talk about, how to also change a focus and to really get a transformation, not just on a everyday life level, but on a more social organizational level. Well, so far from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nilda, and thanks a lot for sharing this really nice matrix. It's great to visualize and see the different intersections. I would ask again if any of the other panelists would like to add or comment anything. Yeah, please, Katya.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nilda. I would like to ask you, where would you position organizations in your framework? Because it seems to me that they may kind of move across several of the layers that you have identified, and it is also a way in which individuals can engage in something more structural, let's say, in the everyday manner. So yeah, where do you see organizations?
Well, I would say organizations as well, the level and the strategy meet. I mean, it depends on which strategy do we want to focus or use on which level to intervene, and this is comes together with a certain form of organization. And organization on the one side understood as a precondition of strategies for transformation, but on the other side, organization understood as practices we want to see as broader practices from linked to the degrowth movement values, maybe. So a kind of if we want to, well, we want to have more democratization. So the way we organize in regarding strategies need to be linked to practices of being more organized in a more democratic way, for example. I mean, it's on the one level, it's part of the practice. And in this organizational practice, we already see certain strategies from the degrowth movement. And, well, yeah, it's mainly linked to the level we want to reach people. Or, I mean, the organization of Ende Gelände is another and need to be different to the organization of solidarity farming, for example. It depends on the goal of the strategy. Yeah, maybe that's what I would say.
Great. Thank you, Nilda. Thank you, Katya. And then if there's no more follow-up comments or clarifications or questions, I would turn to both some of the questions that I've prepared as well as some of the questions that we've received from the audience. And it sounds like maybe one kind of focal point of this conversation that follows will be reflecting on how to actually get degrowth and the degrowth movement to reorient from these sort of everyday activities that maybe there's a strong emphasis on to engaging with this institutional level. And that, I think, would bring me to one of the questions that I thought from the audience was maybe fitting, that maybe pokes a bit back at, is it not the case that already degrowth is engaging at the institutional level? So this is a question from Ulrich Brand, who says, if we work, for instance, at a university and try to promote degrowth, is that not institutional? We often think of institutions as corporations or as companies, as the state, but our university is not an example of engaging at the institutional level. So maybe it can be multiple people that respond to this, but please, who would like to go first in taking up this point? Yeah, Katya, please.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I think that it also connects to my question on organizations, because maybe when you see the term institution, you think of something like, something big and formal, even maybe it doesn't have to be. So, but then if we include organizations into institutions somehow, or if maybe, organizations as a term can be used, then I would say, as degrowthers, we are engaged not just in the everyday, but many of us are part of various alternative organizing practices, whether as part of social movements or part of various collectives. So, Nilda, you have referred to the collective that you are part of. I'm part of an open access independent academic journal, which also comes close to activism. And of course, many of us will have several of these examples. So I think that this kind of everyday personal politics, it very much transcends into the various organizational and institutional structures. Yeah.
Thanks, Katya. Panos, would you like to add on that, please?
Yeah, I would like to step in here as well. And I mean, I picking up also from the point of Uli, I think that's, I wanted to make, I made a strong point in favor of strategic plurality before. And my proposal would be like in trying to select and kind of navigate through all those strategies to critically examine exactly the proposals or institutions in this case that make on strategies that to make some kind of a typology on what makes them or not emancipatory. And I like one of the examples used by André Gorz in the 70s, where he used this example of the demand of 500,000 new housing units to be built up in France every year to meet people housing demands could be either termed as a neo-capitalist reform if it involved like public subsidies to private enterprise, or an anti-capitalist reform if the construction, for example, was socialized public service. So nowadays we probably would dismiss this option altogether for different grounds, like ecological grounds. So my point is here that this is because there is exactly dynamic nature on the institutions themselves. I was thinking about this and I started making some kind of typology. I mean, without wanting to sound a bit too academic here, but I think when evaluating strategies, it is important to try and assess them according to a set of criteria. For example, do they come up directly from bottom-up social movement demands? Like, is there a direct link with local institutions? We can also think like, do they fulfill some kind of universal basic need? Again, we have a certain list and potential needs that we can use there. And perhaps going more closer to the discussion here, like, is this proposal or institution applicable now, but also improves life in the future desired society? So, in other words, does it get us closer to an emancipatory vision like degrowth, or puts us in a better position to reach it? And I very much like and agree with the example of the universities, the public universities, that if they used in a way like of educating degrowth, for example, it perfectly fits within this framework. Another one I can think of, and I think is very important, is worker cooperatives. Like, if you try to fit them in this kind of typology, we see that they kind of fit well. I mean, they basically result from bottom-up action. They can survive in the present system, but also in this envisioned society. They cover, we can say, a universal need of meaningful work. And they have a clear emancipatory vision. So I think this is also a good example of a proposal that simultaneously support an alternative model of social organization now and in the future.
Thanks, Panos. Nilda, please. Nilda, you're muted. Unless it's my headphones again.
No.
Super.
I would like to add one point to this question on if engaging in degrowth strategies on the university is based on the institutional level. And I would like to make a differentiation between the point of what do we do at universities about the topics on degrowth. Do we research on transformation and degrowth movement, or do we do transformative research? And that's quite differently. And often I get in contact with researchers doing research on degrowth or transformative movements, but doing it in a really non-transformative way. And if we don't question what kind of practice in universities of doing research we need to get to other institutional frameworks, it won't be on an institutional level. It's just, as Katya said, she's organized in a other setting with academics doing open research. I don't know what it's exactly, but if it's always based on my own work to involve in the setting. It's not a framework I can get in. It's not, for me, it's not an institutional level. It just niches in institutions.
Yes, thanks, Nilda. And I think that's also something that we heard in the panel last night about the importance of going beyond niches and the challenge of transformative change when action is limited to the niches. One question I would like to ask all the panelists, which we've gotten kind of in different forms in the Q&A channel, is about the interrelations between the different strategic approaches. And for instance, one question was if an individual actor can kind of adapt the strategic logic that they're pursuing as a project or a struggle changes with time. So for instance, beginning with a ruptural approach and then adapting and picking up a more, I don't know, interstitial approach based off of the changing circumstances. And the other question that was asked, which I think is related, is to what extent are these strategies mutually exclusive, or as Panos, you were I think really emphasizing, complementary and needing to be pursued together. But who pursues them together? Is it degrowth as an umbrella movement? Is it an individual actor that pursues multiple strategies simultaneously, or at what level is that done? So those are sort of the two questions I would pose to all the panelists, and you can choose either or both as you see fit. And who would like to go first? Yeah, please, Panos.
I can make a short comment to the second one. Like, I mean, obviously, I made a strong point towards a synthetic view of strategies and not being mutually exclusive. This doesn't mean that everyone has to do everything at the same time, of course. But I think this is very important for also another reason that I didn't mention before, in my view, that this is important to keep this complementarity, synthetic view, to avoid phenomena of co-optation of many of those practices from either capitalist enterprises or xenophobic administrations. Let's say, you know, in individual proposals can also and have also been used in ways that, totally conflicting with degrowth. For example, also we can even some of the examples that we mentioned, like the reduction of working hours with same pay or non-conditional basic income, they can, of course, and we hope the proponents of those proposals hope that this will create part of our time for creativity and political participation and engagement in degrowth initiatives, or provide quality time with family and community. But it can also lead to increased private consumption, or for example, legitimize precarious employment. And similarly, like the use of open source technologies, also praised very much within the community, do not guarantee by themselves the production of more eco-friendly products, for example, or it doesn't ensure that those will or will not be appropriated by for-profit enterprises. That's why I think it's important that tools and technologies need to go hand in hand with an alternative, like production cultures and the institutions that would govern their use. Obviously not from the same people and at the same time, but it is important to keep this bigger perspective in individual struggles, even if we're not all involved in everything, and this is not possible, of course.
Great, thank you, Panos. Yes, Katya, please.
Yes, thanks a lot for this question. So Olin Wright himself, in the last book that he wrote, How to be an Anti-Capitalist in the 21st Century, he identifies this particular strategic configuration to overcome capitalism, and he calls it eroding capitalism. And there he brings together the strategic logics of dismantling, taming, escaping, and resisting. So he takes away the smashing. So my argument would be that all of them should come together, but then, and they can be combined, and there can be synergies between them, or kind of transcendences, because say when an organization becomes occupied by workers, it is a rupture, but then this rupture can join the broader grassroots movements and become part of the interstitial transformative strategy. So VMA is exactly this kind of case. But then what is important is to look at the kind of potential synergies and tensions between the different strategies and within also, because as I have tried to articulate, the taming and dismantling, they are both part of the symbiotic transformation approach, but they have kind of a tension between them. So, and then in terms of who pursues, I would say that, as kind of people, we can choose where our energies are and interests are, but then as part of a broader movement, as the collective, I think it is important for us as degrowthers to think, okay, where are we going and what's the movement kind of positions as key, and also to be aware of the closures and issues that can come with it, and be able to kind of navigate and change the direction based on on various circumstances.
Yeah, thanks for that, Katya. Nilda, would you like to respond to this as well? Nilda, I believe you're muted.
At the moment, I don't have to want to add anything.
Okay, great. I tried to now bring us a bit away from the typologies and the frameworks and Erigel and Wright and get it more focused on concrete things that are being considered in the degrowth movement, and also this question of how to organize and coordinate these questions. So some questions that come to mind are, like Katya was just sort of alluding to, that there's maybe a need in the degrowth movement to prioritize some strategic approaches at different points in time, or to evaluate where their energies are being put. And Nilda put up this great poll that really reflected, okay, a lot of energies are being put into a specific approach, and we heard, hey, it's important to really maybe work on all fronts, and that there's other levels that are being neglected. But how does that realignment or shifting or re-emphasis of the importance of different levels actually happen? What does that look like concretely? Is that the degrowth movement doing that and getting together and sitting down and saying, hey, we really love working in the urban gardens and on these cool eco projects, but in reality, we need to do the dirty work of also engaging with institutions. Raise your hand if you want to do that. Who takes that task, or what does that look like? And yes, that's a question for anyone that would like to pick it up. And then afterwards, we'll go to a question about whether the Green New Deal is an interstitial, is a symbiotic strategy that can support interstitial actions. But first, the question of organizing. Yes, Panos, please.
Again, with a short comment, like, I mean, as I mentioned before, I think not everyone and all social movements need to just start thinking about institutions all the time, but like there is still a space for institutional changes to be part of social movement demands. Or to pick up also from a very interesting panel of yesterday evening on strategies, like there is a need to somehow capitalize, to use this weirdly connotated word, on the work of and the struggles of many social movements on the institutional level. This doesn't have to be done by the movements themselves, and that's why there is a need to somehow perhaps reimagine, reinvent a more non-hierarchical way of keeping an open channel between civil society and higher level institutions. And this has failed several times in Latin America, more recently in my home country, in Greece. We have to like also assess the reasons why this hasn't happened. But I think this is definitely a direction to look at, like keeping some kind of a channel, a structure, I don't know how to call it now, and another institution, perhaps a counter institution that would link in a dynamic and in a way that is kind of ongoing, because social demands never stop. There is a lot of movement action, then there is a lot of burnout at some point, and this somehow very often leads to resignation. And then this is exactly the point and the moment where capital strikes back, so to say. So if we can collectively think about this issue and trying to find this kind of structures that would ensure this open kind of communication, let's say, between the movements and the starting from the local institutions, let's say, and this would be one step.
Thanks, Panos. Nilda, please.
Yeah, I would agree on what Panos just said, and I would like to add that maybe it's also a first step that we need a broader discussion in the degrowth movement about this level of engagement and searching for strategies on this level. And therefore, I think, or we think in our ELA collective, that discussion around conversion is very relevant for the degrowth movement too. And at the moment, there's not a lot research, not a discussion on this topic. And this question on how we think about organizations in transformation and how the degrowth movement and certain knowledge we collected on a other level can be integrated in processes of conversion on a institutional level. So far.
Thank you, Nilda. Katya, would you like to respond to this as well?
Yes, so there are several things, and I would like to keep them short. So yes, there is definitely the international degrowth movement. That's where we can organize, and conferences are manifestations of this movement. And then we have different actors kind of existing out there who connect in various ways. And probably as a movement, we can think, okay, how do we connect better? How do we know who is putting emphasis on what, and how do we take certain collective actions forward? So one recent action was the open letter that some of us collaborated on. That was the initiative of the Vienna conference organizers. And now that the letter is out, then we can think, okay, how do we work on it further and invite or involve the different people who are interested in various parts of this letter to work on it collectively, and what may we want to, how do we want to put it, take it forward. So, and there can be other examples also, but kind of being aware of each other and having the collective spaces where we think as a movement. And I mean, there are such spaces already. So then many of us are involved locally, and I think locally we should build alliances with others out there. So those who connect to degrowth but don't necessarily see themselves, or kind of don't use the same degrowth vocabulary, and kind of being part of the unity of grassroots activities is important also. And then I would say that kind of degrowth as a movement, we can build alliances with others, and this is something that I see as very important, because now as the during the COVID-19 crisis, there are many movements that you can see putting forward radical proposals, but sometimes it's as if we're competing with each other. So then I wonder, okay, we should figure out how to bring our efforts together and join forces, but also in a way that, say, we as the degrowth movement do not compromise also on some of the values that are key for us. And there are some initiatives that try to bring different actors together, like Progressive International that was launched recently, and probably there are also others. So yeah, kind of these three levels: local as degrowth movements, and building alliances with others that I can think of.
Thank you, Katya, and hopefully we'll have some time after the Green New Deal question to come back to this question of building alliances, because I think it's an important one that's come up a few times now. And yes, as promised, the question of the Green New Deal, it's something that we heard Stefania Barca talking about this morning on the Corona panel as a potential, it sounds like, symbiotic strategy that could have emancipatory potential for interstitial approaches, as we heard in the beginning. To what extent do you, as a panelist, evaluate the Green New Deal as being maybe a degrowth symbiotic strategy to make possible a degrowth transformation? Who would like to reply first? Yeah, Katya, go for it.
Yeah, so I would like to say that not all Green New Deals are the same. So there are different ones floating around, and many of them are quite ambiguous about growth or quite pro-growth. But then there is a particular one that Stefania has been addressing, which is the Green New Deal for Europe, which is the one out there that speaks a lot, I would say, to degrowth, and where many degrowthers or some degrowthers have been involved in kind of building this, and also including myself. So, and I think that it is a very important example of this kind of symbiotic, transformative blueprint that can be worked with. And of course, as part of the degrowth movement, we would not agree with all the things that are in there, but it offers an important platform to kind of engage with, and it does bring the kinds of policy, very concrete policy proposals that are not present in other spaces. So I think it is a very important kind of document and important group to build alliances with, again, not forgetting about some of the core ideas of degrowth as we are doing it, but then also being careful about possible cooptations, even if so far I must say that the Green New Deal for Europe has been completely taken over in the discussion by this European Green Deal that the European Commission is putting forward, and there was another discussion earlier devoted exactly to that. And this is also interesting how those of us who kind of support the Green New Deal for Europe, how do we engage with that European Green Deal, which is very much in the frame of the European Commission, which is very much driven by the big lobbying interests, and how, if we try to engage with it, not to kind of create cooptations, but then also not engaging with it at all, yeah, maybe then it will put us, well, keep us in the margins which we want to cross. So that is a difficult kind of tension that I see there.
Thank you, Katya. Would anybody else like to respond on this point or this question? Yes, please, Panos.
Make a couple of comments as well. I mean, yeah, being for or like totally for or totally against this, I mean, I'm not usually following this kind of logics, and I will not follow this for the Green New Deal as well. I think what we definitely cannot afford to do is just ignore it and all those initiatives. So in one way or another, it's good to respond to it. And I think, I mean, the point is not so much that degrowth. I mean, I like generally not being in the defensive, usually also as a movement, and just always responding to other other proposals, and then because then the whole arena is preset, predefined. So it's nice to have our own agenda to bring forward, but this can also be done. Doesn't have to be done always as degrowth under the degrowth banner. What I think is very important is that degrowth infiltrates policy proposals of the wider spectrum of the progressive left, so to say. So also as the current, also previous and ongoing different crises have shown, like it's good to focus on intentionality, but also we need to learn how to exploit such unplanned circumstances. In other words, to link the conditional with the contingent factors of transformation. to say it in other words. So like it's good to focus and have a plan and make and like work on degrowth policy proposals, but also keep in mind that those are there is the instances where those would need to be used, to be proposed, and this is one of those instances now. So it's we definitely should not and cannot ignore this, so to say, and without having I have to admit going much into detail with the Green New Deal. So I don't want to say much more, but this is as a general reflection.
Thank you, Panos. Nilda, would you like to add something? Please.
I would like to add one point. I think it's the question for the degrowth movement is on the question how to develop a strategy, how to get into this strategy of the Green New Deal, like how to intervene as a degrowth movement in a way that it's not just pushed back and without an effect. So we as a degrowth movement have to raise the question on a strategy how to intervene in politics linked to the Green New Deal.
Thank you, Nilda. And maybe I just follow up, Nilda, on that. If in your work with the ILA Collective, some ideas came about for what that would look like, how as a movement to engage effectively to advance such a proposal in a way that is effective from a strategic point of view.
Yeah, we are also still in a discussion about these questions, and I don't have an answer, sorry. But one point is to link the strategies on a everyday life level always to bigger levels, like institutions, not to fall back in this individual frame of, okay, we have now here a good way to consume and to work, and we did a little nice island and it's all good for us, to always have the broader look, not just to Europe, to all the world. And well, no, I really don't have an answer to that, so I just keep it here to raise it as a question, a very necessary and urgent question we have to think about, and we will do it too.
Thanks a lot, Nilda. I would go then to the question of allies, and that's something that also came up earlier. About the importance, I believe, on last night's panel of having public consent and support and building coalitions. And Matthias also talked about it on the Corona panel this morning. And always, I think, a bit underlying it is a feeling that that's something that Degrowth has not quite managed to achieve, this broader coalition. And I pose the question again to all the panelists, if there's an idea of why that's not been successful, and what acting strategically could look like to overcome those barriers, what to do to forge those alliances and to build that larger consensus, both with movements but also with society. Who would like to go first? Katya, would you like to start?
Yes, so I would say that, maybe I don't have an answer why. Maybe because we are a young movement, and there has been a lot of discussion going on, figuring out what degrowth is and what it is not, and kind of elaborating the different areas of the discussion itself, and there is still a huge scope for it. So, and maybe it is kind of this moment when we're thinking exactly about alliances and strategies. I mean, I would say that to some extent, some alliances have been happening. So say in the kind of academic activist discussion, there is of course the alliance built around or in connection to the idea of the pluriverse and the kind of different worlds, a world where different worlds fit. And this is where Degrowth, I think, has been in constant dialogue with the other ideas, such as Buen Vivir, such as ecological Swaraj. There have also been some alliances when it comes to some, like say the collective letter to the European Parliament, I think it was, or the European institutions in 2018. So it was a broad coalition putting forward the proposals on kind of how to reform and make different emphasis in these institutions that are out there, where some people and groups who do not necessarily endorse Degrowth, they have also been part of this. So I think there are some examples out there, but we can definitely do more and should do more. And I think that maybe something not to underestimate is that Degrowth is an umbrella term. So I think it is quite fascinating how within Degrowth discussion and within Degrowth conferences, we do see a lot of kind of movements and ideas that would not necessarily be in the same spaces otherwise. So say from radical urban alternatives to digital commons and to environmental justice movements. So I think that we should appreciate this and also kind of create action and think collectively how to kind of put forward action using this umbrella of Degrowth. And when thinking of the local level that I mentioned earlier, I think it can also be helpful to kind of locally be in dialogue with various grassroots agents about Degrowth, and then it can be a way of bringing the different dispersed maybe struggles and those who engage with like firefighting every day just to keep their, say, collective initiatives, but to kind of make a collective feeling that we are part of the same struggle. And I think at the local level, Degrowth has potential to do this, as, say, our experience of organizing the Malmö Degrowth conference demonstrated.
Yes, thank you, Katya. And I think that's also something we heard in the morning panel when the kind of degrowth municipalist topic came up and the potential for creating really flourishing local realities of degrowth. Who else would like to pick up this question? Nilda or Panos? Panos, please. Sorry.
Okay. I mean, I don't particularly share the view that the degrowth has not been successful, honestly. Over the years, I'm not so pessimistic. I mean, of course, we can achieve more, and there is, all the problems are still here. But I'd like to see like more of a brighter picture of what degrowth has achieved over those years, and from a point when this word was not even discussed. Now it has to be, even if it's misunderstood and misinterpreted sometimes. It's increasingly like the establishment, let's say, is increasingly in need to respond to it, and that's definitely one of the things the movement has achieved so far, and we should pick up on that. Definitely, there is a need for coalitions. I mean, there have been some strong coalitions with movements like the Commons movement or FADA, etc. That sometimes you often see the same crowd of people involved in many different actions and movements, and sometimes you feel like one is picking up and the other one is losing kind of dynamic. But I think this is also part of the story, and even though I'm a very much like strong proponent of degrowth, I'm definitely don't care that there is one movement dominating the other, or like. For me, what is important is that many of those emancipatory ideas come up from all different kinds of social movements and even other parts of society. So it's not like I don't really so much stick to this wording so much, but maybe it's even time to move on and form a new kind of coalition. I mean, it's certainly there is a need to make new or improve the cooperation and alliances with groups in the global south, so to say, also within like working class areas in the global north. So there is this kind of usual, let's say, criticism about degrowth. So yeah, there is definitely work need to be done. But yeah, I think I wouldn't be so pessimistic about this so far.
Thank you, Panos, for that optimism. Nilda, please.
Well, one very important partner for coalitions, also for the degrowth movement, is, in my opinion, the unions in general, because the topic of work as a central point how society is organized, especially in our context of the global North. It's very important to question this social organization for degrowth in general, but also in this context of unions. And therefore, I think this link between degrowth in general as an umbrella term, as Katya said, but with this already established institutions, unions, is, and in my opinion, a very important strategy to really transform society. So there we need to build up coalitions. Yeah.
Thank you.
And maybe,
sorry,
one thing, maybe in this context, the point of wording maybe would make a difference in many cases to sometimes frame the topics differently to make it easier, make the linkages easier to the groups you want to coalesce with.
Thanks for that, Nilda. And today at 5 p.m., you can tune in at the conference. There will be a panel dedicated to the question of degrowth and unions. So yes, I think it's very much a central and important question. Maybe we only have 8 minutes left, so I would try and ask maybe a bit of a tricky question. And it's a bit of one of the impetus for this panel was a short piece that some colleagues of mine at Degrowth Info wrote about the degrowth movement suffering from what we described as strategic indeterminism. So their inability basically to commit to certain strategies and to evaluate strategies critically. It was sort of a conviction that there is too much openness and plurality and a willingness to say any strategy is fine and it's good if anybody's doing anything, which maybe gets us a bit in this tendency where a lot of people are then doing individual practices. So I would ask each of the panelists to respond quickly in just a 1-minute reply. To what extent do you agree with this argument? And if not, a short response on why not. And I give the word first to Katya.
Yeah. So I would probably say that, yeah, we should think more on strategy, but I would say that strategy does not have to undermine multiplicity. And then we should combine this collective thinking about strategies, which this conference is a great space for. And there have been other starting points like the series and the Degrowth Info blog. So and then, yeah, we can think how we identify the priorities and where we go while still sticking to the multiplicity. So I think one is not the enemy of the other.
Thank you, Katya, for the very diplomatic answer. Panos, please, I ask you to go next. Panos, I cannot hear you, sorry.
I'm sorry, this time it was my fault. I forgot. So I think in order to really advance like this understanding, our understanding of strategies and of how we can complement them without, as you say, being lost in plurality, I think it really makes sense to keep a long-term vision and evaluate the strategies and institutions according to their emancipatory potential. So, as Wright would say, to identify those institutions that would put us in a better position to make more later. And this kind of subversive practices that, while they can survive now, they at the same time prefigure an alternative form of social relations. So in this way, basically facilitate the conditions for emancipatory transformation.
Thank you, Panos. And Nilda, please.
Well, strategies need to be worked out by plural perspectives. So this would be one very relevant step for reaching out for openness and pluralism, but not to phase out in this without a strategy in this pluralism. So the strategies of the degrowth movement need to be plural. So this is, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Nilda. And yes, hopefully this is also something that will be continually discussed throughout the conference. This panel today is very much a chance to hopefully bridge the more large-scale transformation questions and multiple crises that we've been touching on the opening day and earlier today. And as we transition then to more sectoral specific strategies in the days to come, we'll hopefully hear more about how to balance this tension between plurality and long-term strategic direction. And now that we come to the end of the panel, I would just give some pragmatic words about what comes next. So there'll be a closing poll, which I believe Suni will help us put in the chat in a moment. And there will also be a Discord channel that follows. And the Discord channel that follows is the same one where the parallel conversation is going, but it's going to be a lasting place for some of the questions that came up in this panel to be discussed. Actually, I've been corrected. There is no closing panel, so please, no closing poll. So please don't anticipate this to come. And so we encourage all the participants that want to continue this conversation to transition to the Discord channel afterwards, and also invite the panelists to go there as well to engage with the participants. And we'll share with you guys that link. Yes, any closing words that anybody wants to add or feel like they didn't get a chance to say while we have 3 minutes left? Yes, Katya, please.
Not final words, but I am curious about the results of the first poll, because I missed them, and I think that people have been commenting that they haven't seen them either. So I wonder where our orientations are, at least those present in the panel.
Yes, thank you, Katya. You can also find these in the Discord channel. So this is just a great promotional point for the Discord channel. And with this, I think it's a good opportunity to close the poll, close the panel and invite everybody to the Discord channel afterwards. And a big thank you to the panelists, to the audience, and also especially to the conference organizers, the whole team that made a panel like this possible during these crazy Corona times. It's been a big, long 3-month process to reorient. So yes, a big appreciation for them. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference. Cool. Ciao, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.